Welcome to the World Chess Championship game number 3. Ding in the lead, winning that first game as black, getting a draw in the second round, and Gukesh with the white pieces. Gukesh starts with the move d4. Ding plays knight f6. We have knight to f3, pawn to d5, and pawn to c4. Ding plays pawn to e6, captures on d5, captures on d5, knight c3. All these moves have been played previously. After pawn c6, it's worth noting that this capture on d5 changed the pawn structure to what's known as a Carlsbad pawn structure. White has these 5 pawns connected on the king side and center, and 2 pawns on the queen side. Black 3 pawns on the king side and 4 on the queen side. Typically, the ideas in the Carlsbad are to either play the minority attack with the moves pawn b4, pawn b5, trying to create a weakness, or using the majority of pawns with the moves pawn to f3 and e4. Gukesh plays queen c2. We have pawn g6. A big problem that black has in these openings, and I've played this as white in a lot of competitions over the board, is the development of this light squared bishop. With the move queen c2, white is preventing black from developing this bishop to the f5 square, and if you go to g4, you run into the move knight to e5. So a way to solve this problem is to play the move pawn to g6, followed by bishop to f5, developing the bishop with a tempo against the queen. Here Gukesh played h3, which is a rarer move, and it's a question of whether Ding is prepared in this position. He's already taken some time to decide whether to play g6, and after h3, the question is Ding going to play the move bishop f5, where a later, once the queen moves, g4 will force the bishop to find a better square. Ding plays bishop to f5. We have queen to b3, targeting the b7 pawn, and queen to b6. Pawn to g4, queen captures, pawn captures, and bishop captures. Bishop to c2. Okay, so the bishop is targeting the pawn on b3, but the question is, do you actually want to take the pawn on b3? Gukesh plays the move bishop f4 and asks Ding, go ahead, take my pawn. Do you dare to take this pawn on b3? Would you take this pawn on b3? Is it a free pawn, or is there a reason not to take? In the game, Ding played the move pawn to h5. But let's see what happens if you take on b3. White has the move knight to d2, and the only reasonable square for the bishop is to go to the c4 square. If you go to c2, you run into the move rook to c1, and your bishop has nowhere to go. If bishop to e4, pawn to f3 traps the bishop. After takes, knight d2, again this didn't happen in the game, but we're trying to understand, can you take the pawn? Knight takes on c4, pawn takes, and white has the move pawn to e3, winning back the material immediately, and if you try to hold on to the pawn, white can now play bishop to g2, threatening to take the pawn on b5, taking advantage of this diagonal. So in the game, after bishop f4, Ding played the move pawn to h5, trying to undermine this pawn structure. After rook g1, we have takes on g4, takes on g4. Okay, we have a queenless middle game, both sides with 6 pawns, and both sides with the bishop pair. White has a weakened pawn structure. White still has a kingside pawn majority, and black has a queenside pawn majority. White has some control over the a file with the open rook, and black the h file with their open rook. Black also currently has great control over white's majority. The b4 square is covered, and the pawn potentially will hang in a lot of variations. Try to come up with plans in this position for both sides. How do you exactly see white getting an advantage, and how should black play in this position as well? Okay, from one perspective, white is better developed, and can potentially use the fact that this bishop on c2 is quite vulnerable, trapping it and putting some pressure on black to solve the problem of this light squared bishop. In addition to that, although white cannot play the move pawn b4, it's a really important plan to initiate, which is the move pawn f3, pawn to e4, if you can achieve it. So we have two plans for white: to be able to trap the bishop or play the move f3, e4. From black's point of view, black's plan is to consolidate this position. If black can find a way to get his bishop to safety, maybe trade off these dark squared bishops, black will have the better pawn structure and long-term perspectives. Black played the move knight d7. Again, if you take, we have knight to d2, bishop c4, takes, e3, and again this idea of capturing the pawn, or if b5, bishop g2 is an important move. Okay, knight t7 is played, knight to d2. Now the bishop cannot take the pawn on b3, and rook to g8 is played. The idea of rook g8 is that after rook c1 is played, the bishop is not trapped because black can insert this move pawn g5, attacking the bishop on f4 and also giving the bishop some freedom to go back to safety. So rook g8 is kind of a clever move by Ding, and I like to see this style of chess by Ding as well. It's a fighting spirit. He's not afraid to have this bishop in such a precarious position, um, but is able to think tactically and solve his problems tactically as they come. Um, let's see, though, if this is actually going to work out for him. After pawn g5, the bishop no longer is able to come back to this diagonal, but it does have a safe square on f5. g5 also shuts the rook out from the potential of pushing g5 and getting some play on the g-file himself. The knight moves to h5, and the bishop has to make a decision. Where do you go? Do you go to e3 or to h2? e3 is a passive move, and it prevents you from playing the move f3, e4, so Gukesh plays the move bishop h2, and Ding finds a nice move with rook to h8. The idea is to win a tempo against the bishop on h2 with the move knight to g7. Okay, from white's perspective, if knight g7 is played, the bishop on h2 is hit, and the knight has the option of coming to e6, attacking both the g5 pawn and the d4 pawn. So anticipating that black is going to play knight g7 on the next move, how would you respond as white? Okay, good that you took the moment to think there for a second. You know, what exactly is white going to play? Gukesh played the move pawn to f3. And when I was analyzing this position, I analyzed all sorts of moves. I analyzed e3, bishop h3, rook c1, bishop g2, and rook to h1 as well. And Gukesh is just saying, I'm going to go ahead with my plan and go ahead with pawn to f3 and pawn to e4. I find this fascinating that even though we have an endgame, or you can call it a queenless middle game, the plans of the majority attack, or playing for the majority, are still very important and very present. In addition to that, the bishop is still a bit trapped on the c2 square and has to be careful not to be fully trapped and lost. So Gukesh plays pawn to f3, which I think is an extremely strong move. After knight g7, the bishop moves to safety, and rook to h5 is played. Rook to h5 is the decisive heir of the game, and it's not exactly clear without the use of an engine to understand why rook h5 will potentially lose the game for black. The best move is the move bishop to e7. Now, the rook on h5 hits the pawn, and the bishop on e7 hits the pawn as well. But there's a critical difference. Once the bishop gets to g5, it has the potential of eliminating this knight on d2, which in fact is defending the pawn on b3. So after the move bishop e7, for example, if rook c1 is played, the bishop can come back to safety and it's no problem. If you play the move e4 first, preventing the bishop from escaping, If you take, the bishop has nowhere to go. So if bishop g5 is played, after rook to c1, black is still fine here. Although the bishop is trapped, black can play the move bishop takes on d2, king takes on d2, and the bishop escapes, and black is up material. So this is why bishop e7 is critical, to be able to attack the knight on d2 and then win the pawn on b3. In the game, Ding played the move rook to h5. He had 27 minutes on his timer. This is similar to the first game, where Gukesh did have a tremendous amount of time edge over Ding, and Ding started to move quickly and very precisely, being able to generate play, getting his pieces forward. It's apparent that Gukesh's opening prep is working. He is able to put a tremendous amount of time pressure onto Ding to be able to solve these concrete problems, which are very difficult to solve. Rook to h5 is played. We have pawn to e4. The threat is to trap the bishop. It is very clear rook c1 is the threat. If you take on g5, then the game is practically over. The bishop is lost. Ding captures on e4, captures on e4, and with rook to c1 coming, next move, how exactly is black supposed to prevent the loss of the bishop? Take a moment, if you'd like, to try and solve this concrete problem. Not all problems, I'm sure you do chess.com puzzles or Elite Chess puzzles, not all problems have direct tactical solutions where you're winning material, but when you're playing the game, there are very concrete problems to solve, and this is an opportunity, if you'd like, to see if you can solve this dilemma. Black to play. Okay, welcome back. Black has really only one move here, and it's the move knight to e6. The knight is jumping to the d4 square, where it supports the bishop on c2 and attacks the pawn on b3. In the game, rook c1 was played and knight d4 was played. Bishop f2, not a hard move to find, is played, and again, Ding needs to solve some problem. The knight is the only defender of the bishop. If you play a move like bishop g7, then we can take, and the bishop falls. Is that correct? So if you'd like, take another moment here and try to think what you would play with the black pieces, how you would solve this huge problem in the position. Okay, welcome back. Ding first plays the move bishop g7, recognizing that if you take immediately, we have the move bishop takes, attacking the rook, forcing the rook to move. If you play a move like rook to g2, for example, then after bishop to d2, you lose the bishop on c2, but you win a lot of pawns. You can win the pawn on g5 and maybe have some compensation. Maybe there's a better line as well for black after takes rook g2. Yeah, there is, which is bishop wins this pawn first, and it's actually very important to win one more pawn because the rook on c1 will have to move after bishop e3, and black will win a third pawn. And in terms of material, the material has evened out. Black has 3 pawns for the loss of the bishop. Okay, so this is not good enough for white simply to take the knight on d4, but white plays really accurately, and Gukesh starts to really show his domination over Ding in terms of his ability to solve problems concretely. If black is going to lose the bishop on c2, he needs to capture as many pawns as possible, and Gukesh finds the cleanest move here to be able to shut out any counterplay and avoid black from being able to pick up a lot of pawns. He plays the move knight to e2, challenging the knight on d4 and maintaining the pressure on the bishop on c2. Why this move is so strong is that the bishop cannot move because the knight is hanging, and if the knight takes, for example, the bishop takes back and the rook and the bishop are hanging. So knight to e2 is a very strong move here by Gukesh, and it in fact will win material. After knight takes on b3, we have rook takes on c2, knight takes on d2, king takes on d2, and knight to e5. The knight is headed into the f3 square. The knight comes to d4, controlling the f3 square, and after rook to d8, pinning the knight, we have king to e2, rook to h2, pinning the bishop, threatening rook takes on d4, and we have bishop g2, blocking the rook's attack, and therefore the knight is defended. And black plays pawn to a6. So white is up 1 point from a material point of view, but there is something much more significant in this position. White also maintains the edge of the bishop pair. These two bishops, although they don't serve an active role at the moment, they control a lot of squares on the board and have a lot of potential to create threats against the opponent long term. The longer the game goes, if white is able to maintain this bishop pair, their advantage will continue to grow. So although white's up only 1 point, white has a sizable, if not winning, advantage in this position because of the two bishops. Now the question, how do you convert this game in the cleanest and simplest way? Well, whenever you're trying to convert a position from a material edge, your first and foremost thing is to prevent as much counterplay as possible. The second thing, if you can achieve it, is to trade off the pieces. So we need to find a plan as white to prevent any counterplay and organize a way to trade off pieces. Gukesh does this in straightforward and excellent fashion, and he does it extremely precisely. So I was very impressed with his quality of play, of course, myself checking afterwards with the engine. After pawn b3, the pawn is no longer... Going back to this position, I was thinking very deeply about how to come up with a active plan with the white pieces. I was thinking about moves like knight b3, which are absolutely fine, and nothing wrong with that move. But it's just a testament to show how organized Gukesh is in his ability to plan and strategize as to what is the main focus of the position. White is already up ahead of material, so he doesn't need necessarily to find an active plan. He needs to consolidate his position, avoid any counterplay, and simplify the game. He plays pawn b3, getting off the pressure of this diagonal, and after rook d7, plays rook to c1. A really classy move, and the idea is to head over to the d-file to trade off the rooks on d7. After king to e7, we have rook d1, and Ding has nothing better than to go back to e8. He took about 5 minutes or so with this move, and he's down to 1 minute and 50 seconds left in a lost position, technically. And also he has to reach time control. There's no increment in this game, so you have to reach the time control at move 40 to get extra time. We are only on move 32 with white to play. Bishop g3 was played, attacking the rook, and after rook to h5, attacking the pawn, we have knight to f3, trading off the knights and trading off the rooks. Knight takes, king takes, bishop to d4. The problem here for black is that if you try to win this pawn on g5, like take, and take, you run into this mating problem with bishop to h4. Again, a key component of this endgame wasn't just that white is up 1 point, it's that white maintains the bishop pair with the potential of threats. Back to the game, bishop d4 is played. We have rook to h1, rook takes on g5, and bishop to h3. Really clinical finish by Gukesh, and the game is practically over. Ding has 9 seconds left, and white is completely winning. f5 was played, and after bishop to f4, rook to h5, Gukesh captured on f5, and Ding resigned the game. Ding is also down to 0 seconds as well, and the time control is not reached. If you take on h1, white can win in several ways. You can take on g6 and then pick up the rook, or you can take the rook with a check and then pick up the rook on h1, which is the easiest way to win the game. So something to note about this game is that Ding is playing with fire, keeping this bishop on the c2 square, and he's playing a little bit risky, which is a different Ding than what we've seen. We've seen Ding kind of play very solidly and play concretely and tactically, but Was this too much of a risk to play the move bishop c2 and keep the bishop there? If the bishop's not going to take the pawn, then what was this entire idea of bishop c2? Maybe it was that Gukesh was starting to outplay Ding. In this game, clearly he did. Ding unable to solve the concrete problems and made this critical error of playing the move. Just to show it again, this critical error of playing rook to h5, which had long-term problems of this bishop on e2 after the move e4 was played. Okay, so we'll see how things progress in the future games. It is all tied up for now. Gukesh must be feeling completely relieved to not only to be able to win a game, but to be able to win his first game ever in a World Championship match, and to win it right after coming off of that first game defeat with the white pieces. Now he has not only not lost any points with this win, but he's also gained points. So it was actually critical that Ding held this as black, and the tables have completely turned now. It is Gukesh who is on the kind of stronger side. He's coming off of a win, and Ding typically can use a lot of his previous wins as confidence. He doesn't have that now. The game has leveled, and it is back to even score. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned for game number 4, which happens tomorrow, and I look forward to doing the recap then.